Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. It's time for the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters, writers, editors, journalists, all different people who are putting stuff out in the borough of the Bronx. And this way you get some insight into not only what they're writing about, but also into what they're thinking about as they put things out. This evening, we're going to, in our second segment, do a fascinating segment on an exhibit that's taking place at Hostos Community College. But right now, let's go over to City Limits and say hello to our friend Mariana Simões. Mariana, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Gary. Thanks for having me on the show.
Sure. Mariana, for folks who don't know, she's been on our program before as a climate environment reporter for City Limits. You had an article a little while back that I thought was fascinating. And, we talk about climate change and we talk about it affecting all kinds of different things. You did an article about how it might affect our public schools and New York City schools. Just give us a little background. What's there? Why schools?
Well, that's a good question, Gary. Nobody really talks about schools when we're talking about climate change, right? And really, they're facing a dual threat right now. Flooding caused by coastal storms and inland flooding caused by heavy rains, which we call flash floods, are two things that are really affecting the public school system right now.
So, are we concerned that if, God forbid, something were to happen, what do we do with the kids? I guess we would be concerned about the structures of the buildings and the health of the buildings. What's the concern there that you wrote about?
Well, my story looks at, for example, Leaders High School in South Brooklyn. They were hit really hard back in September. I don't know if you guys recall, but there was a massive flash flood that took place
I do
at,
remember, sure.
yeah, at the end of September. And so the kids there, there's a massive complex over there in Brooklyn, where the kids actually had their basement flooded of the school, and that's the area where they come in and check in every morning, and that's also where their
Oh.
cafeteria is. So it really disrupted the entire day. And instead of, saying everybody should go home, we'll use one of our snow days, for example, they didn't do that. And people had to come in, the faculty, the students. It was kind of a disaster. Everybody was wading through sewage water to get to
Which
school.
is horrible, especially for children. Was it the kind of thing that they couldn't clear up after a day or two and it really impacted on a longer term? Or is it really kind of, for want of a better term, a flash flood that it came, it cleaned out, they cleaned it up and moved on? Or was it more difficult for them to, get back into shape?
In this case, it was a quick cleanup. But I think the point of the story and what we're seeing across the
Yes.
city is that these floods are happening more and more often. And
Yes,
we
of
should be
course.
thinking about this as a reoccurring issue that the city needs to tackle. And, the same way we think about snow days, we got to start thinking about flood days.
The controller who did a study about this um, shared their map, which was rather stark. In other words, they pinpointed all the schools that are endangered, and it was there. You can get a look at it. This is pretty serious. I mean, it's not like just a few schools in each borough. This is essentially everything, right?
Right, exactly. What we're seeing is that over a quarter of the city's public school buildings, that's 28%, are currently at the risk of extreme stormwater flooding. And 41% of these are located in Brooklyn, and over 28% are in Queens.
Hmm.
The controller's office, they came up with these numbers using data from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and New York City panel on climate change, as well, and New York Department of Environmental Protection. So they, took all this data together and sort of created a map of where the areas are that are most affected.
Right. What's to be done? Like, in other words, we talk about coastlines and we talk about barriers and maybe other infrastructure things you can do to prevent flooding in those areas. But in the schools that are in such diverse places, or are we talking about really doing something like that, barriers and other considerations around the school, or is it just who knows?
Well, the city has been doing things. They have built green infrastructure in schoolyards to catch the rainwater, right, before it even makes it into the sewer and overflows the sewer. And they did install 40 flood barriers in schools that were hard hit by Superstorm Sandy.
Mhm.
But the point I think that a lot of environmental advocates have been raising is that that's just not enough. There have been efforts, to create other kinds of resiliency efforts around neighborhoods surrounding schools, which is great. But we don't think about specifically targeting schools and how we can create, uh, you know, schools that are resilient to climate change. We need to
Yes.
start thinking about those
Right.
things.
Thinking about, and I guess it fall, and this will be the last point because I want to move on to something else. But it would seem to me that number one, you've got to deal with existing infrastructure. We have many schools, many older schools, but also take it into account when we construct new schools, so that at least for the future we have half a chance. The other thing, or another thing that I want to talk with you about is this new climate report that you wrote about last month. And I'll just read a new statewide report on the impacts of climate change that New York City will be impacted on all fronts. We see what the temperatures are like. We know that all the boroughs have been warmer. Let's see, the Big Apple is getting 6 to 10 degrees warmer, and it's not going in the other direction at any time soon. So, talk a little bit about the report and what does it signal for all of us, really?
The report is done by NYSERDA, so that's a statewide
Yes.
entity. So it looks at how climate change is going to affect the entire state. And basically, what it says is that we're going to see more coastal flooding, we're going to see more severe storms, rainier days, and hotter temperatures across the state. But New York City, in particular, is going to be hit on all these fronts, as you said. It will continue to be the wettest region in the state. So annual precipitation is going to increase from 4 to 11% by 2050. New York City's also going to get a lot hotter, and it is also the hottest region in the state.
Let me just ask you about that. That's
Go
a
ahead.
fascinating thing to me, considering that there are upstate areas near the Great Lakes and all different places that are actually um, colder and maybe would get melted ice a little more frequently than we would. That's a fascinating thing from, I guess, a geographic point of view. That New York City, I don't have to draw a map; everybody knows where it's located. Would be the most affected. I just think that's an interesting thing. When yes, there are other coastline areas. I mean, Long Island, and you could
Well,
certainly go upstate. And as I said, the areas that up in Oswego and all that that border on the Great Lakes.
sure, sure. But let's dig into that a little. Think about New York City. It's got a ton of buildings. And what
Oh,
really causes all that heat is that we are, an urban heat island. We're creating that
right.
all that concrete, right? Really
Very
is
good
what
point.
makes it hotter, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And a lot of people say, well, we know what happens with airplanes and what happens with cars and the pollutants, but the fact is, buildings are what cause most of climate change,
That's correct.
more than those other things. Not to say they don't exist. So, what is the result of this NYSERDA report? Do you get the sense that the state legislature is taking action at the New York Power Authority, because, of course, the generation of energy is a big thing. How did that fall? What happens with that?
Well, they said when I asked them about the goal of this report, NYSERDA said it's really to inform policymakers and folks within their own jurisdictions to take action. The state has known about these issues for a long time. We've been watching climate change get worse. And there are people doing things about it. You have climate laws that are in effect. You have the CLCPA right now, which is the state's climate law that got passed in 2019, that
Right.
is trying to sort of curtail all these, curtail climate change, stop it from advancing so fast. But the fact of the matter is, this report shows that it's accelerating, and we might not be
Yeah.
able to catch up with it. Right.
And listen, we're talking about things that we can do in New York State, but of course, these are federal and international issues. I mean,
Right.
there's no question about it. One other thing that you wrote about that I thought was interesting, and again, it's in a way how all of us can deal with climate change, is this multi-state pledge to boost the use of climate-friendly heat pumps in homes. Maybe this is a way of looking at our buildings and our homes and seeing more efficient ways of heating them.
Well, as you mentioned, Gary, buildings are the biggest contributors to climate change in New York City. So there are ways that we're trying to tackle that by changing, the way that buildings pollute, right?
Right.
And one of the ways is by switching out these putting in heat pumps, and switching out, traditional heating methods and cooling systems that run on fossil fuels. So what basically Governor Hochul did was she made a commitment to quadruple heat pump installations across New York by 2030. And she's doing that by trying to get the market to go on board with selling more of these, right? Getting the industry to make more heat pumps available on the market so they could reach that goal.
Yeah, of course. I can already hear property owners and landlords saying, "Okay, I'm happy to do this." Having said that, I think maybe we ought to take a look at how whether tax breaks or some other incentives, because to just tell people, and not to say they shouldn't, but it becomes a pretty heavy lift to get. And then, of course, private homeowners are going to say, "Look, I'm happy to do it, but the times are tough now, especially." So and we don't know yet if there's any financial support for the concept, do we?
There is tax
There is?
breaks, there
Okay, I'm
are all
happy to
those
hear
things,
that.
but you're right in saying that it's an expensive upfront cost,
Yes,
and so a lot of folks don't do it because it's expensive upfront. However, in the long run, it does save on utility bills, so there is an
right.
incentive to do it, right?
Mariana, we got about a minute. What else you working on? What's coming up? Something good?
Oh, well, I'm
Name
working on a
one.
name one. Okay, I'm working on a story which hopefully will be put out this week that looks at the New York State budget and what we should expect going forward for all of the climate laws. So you asked about
Yeah,
climate laws and
I
what's
was going
being
to say
done.
this fits right into everything we just talked about. What a perfect summary
Exactly.
for our segment. Listen, Mariana Simões, who does climate and the environment for City Limits, thank you so much for joining us. Say hello to all our friends, and we'll see you around town.
All right. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Gary.
Great, very informative. What we'll do is, folks, we will take a short break. And then when we come back, you're really going to enjoy this very special segment we have about an exhibit at Hostos Community College. Don't go away.